The process is rigged.
It's a rigged election.
It's a rigged system. And they take these lies and they put them on front pages.
And I said, this system is rigged.
Remember, folks, it's a rigged system. Just remember it. It's a rigged system. It's a rigged system. Don't ever forget it. The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
We received specific and credible allegations of fraud, made an effort to look into these to satisfy ourselves that they were without merit. And I was in the posture of trying to figure out, there was an avalanche of all these allegations of fraud that built up over a number of days, and it was like playing whack-a-mole because something would come out one day and then the next day it would be another issue.
On the result of the investigations, the interviews that had gone on Fulton County, how would those results have been communicated to the White House, to the president?
I don't know how they were initially communicated. I do know that they came up in subsequent conversations with the president, and Dag Rose and I essentially told him, we looked into that, and it's just not true.
Okay, so he was informed.
I told the president myself that several times in several conversations, that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, it was not true.
The president said there had been major fraud, and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do. And the president has repeatedly suggested that there was some kind of outpouring of unexpected votes in inner city areas like Philadelphia. As recently as January 13th, when he walked off the NPR set, he was asked by the interviewer, what's your evidence of fraud? And he said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolute rubbish.
It didn't work. It absolutely worked. It didn't work. No. Trust the system. 200,000 people that weren't even registered voted. 430,000 votes disappeared from President Trump's tally. And you can't stand there and tell me that it worked.
The turnout in Philadelphia was in line with the state's turnout, and in fact, it was not as impressive as many suburban counties, and there was nothing strange about the Philadelphia turnout. It wasn't like there was all these unexpected votes that came out in Philadelphia. So, I think once you actually look at the votes, and then there's an obvious explanation. For example, in Pennsylvania, Trump ran weaker than the Republican ticket generally. He ran weaker than two of the state candidates. He ran weaker than the congressional delegation running for federal Congress, and he ran weaker than the Republican, I think. I haven't looked at this recently, but he generally was a weak element on the Republican ticket, so that does not suggest that the election was stolen by fraud.
Then he went off on double voting. The top of the next page, he said, dead people are voting. Indians are getting paid to vote. He meant people on Native American reservations. He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people. Probably easier for dead people to submit mail-in ballots than it is to vote in person. You had about 30,000 of those. We're checking the records of the cemeteries around Philadelphia.
Like that, but it kept on being repeated, and I found it annoying because it didn't seem that it was right. So I called McSwain, and he got back to me. He said, no, the problem is that Mastriano threw out this number, and what he did was he mixed apples and oranges. He took the number of applications for the Republican primary and he compared it to the number of absentee votes cast in the general election. But once you actually go and look and compare apples to apples, there's no discrepancy at all. And that's one of the, I think at some point I covered that with the president.
They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people.
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
And I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff. On the other hand, when I went into this and would, tell him how crazy some of these allegations were, there was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were. My opinion then and my opinion now is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that, including the 2000 Mules movie.
Well, maybe you can assess that 2,000 Mules, and people are talking about that.
Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, I just think the GBI was unimpressed with it, and I was similarly unimpressed with it because I think I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was, because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was, but the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, it basically, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes. And the premise that, if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals. This was some kind of contractor, and our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So but then when the movie came out, I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking. It didn't establish widespread illegal harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. It's still the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non-compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. And I reiterated that they'd wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public.
And you voted?
Yes, sir.
How'd it go?
Voted early. It went well, except for the
can't really trust the software. Dominion software all over.
That there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there, and I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on it. And it was doing grave disservice to the country.
We voted, and right in the top right-hand corner of the Dominion voting machine that we used, there was a Wi-Fi symbol with 5 bars. So that most definitely connected to the internet, without a doubt. So they stole that from us twice. We're not doing it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. So we're standing up, we're here, and whatever happens, we're not laying down again.
It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm.
I remember that one of the things Mark said at some point was, you can't show an actual vote was flipped, which I found at the time to be a remarkable assertion, because
Even Sidney Powell, defending herself in a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, argued that, quote, no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact.
We had a report that the heads of Dominion and Smartmatic, somewhere in the mid-teens, 2013, 14, whatever, went down to Venezuela for a get-to-know meeting with Maduro so they could demonstrate to Maduro the kind of vote fixing they did for Chavez. Sometimes I go and look myself online when stuff comes up. This time I didn't have the time to do it.
Rudi was, at this stage of his life, in the same ability to manage things at this level or not. And obviously, I think Bernie Kerik publicly said it. They never proved the allegations that they were making and they were trying to develop.
You say the heads of Dominion and Smartmatic?
Yes, that's what I was told. Before the press conference, I was told about it. Sometimes I go and look myself online when stuff comes up. This time I didn't have the time to do it. Because they were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots, and we can prove every single thing I just said.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And in the theory was also completely nuts, right? I mean, it was a combination of Italians and Germans. I mean, different things have been floating around as to who was involved. I remember Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan. She has an affidavit from somebody who says they wrote a software in and something with the Philippines and that. Just all over the radar.
Sometimes I go and look myself online when stuff comes up. This time I didn't have the time to do it.
We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with the technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president. And I never took another phone call from Mr. Navarro.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening, and I didn't think it was, that I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
So on December 14th, Barr quit.
Okay, so Trump's White House counsel, his campaign staff, his lawyers, 2 attorneys general and their officers, all appointed by Trump, investigated and found no evidence of widespread election fraud. But what if they're wrong?
Really discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
I don't want to say that what we're doing is right, but if the election's being stolen, what is it going to take?